Hey, so this week I've been kind of sick and overwhelmed with work, and with all that stuff going on in my head, I just wanted to make something fun. I just wanted to fall back into my own style a little bit, do something that I enjoy, and I think it turned out really, really cool, and I'm really happy with it. So we're gonna break it down. So we're gonna start off in a new project file, get all of this crap out of here, misclick twice, but we'll get there eventually. And we're gonna spawn in an icosphere. We're gonna open up this tab down here. We're gonna drop this down to 1. We're gonna scale it up a little bit to something like this. Yeah, that's probably fine. We're gonna come over here to our modifiers tab, and we're gonna throw on a wireframe modifier and a solidify modifier. What we're doing here is we're just adding a little bit of thickness, and you could do this with just the wireframe, right? But I like that when we add our next part, it adds a little bit more detail if we can control this with the solidify modifier. And that next step is a super simple one. We're gonna throw a subdivision surface on this. We're gonna turn this up to 4, and you can see we already have our outer shell going on here. We're gonna shade it smooth, and yeah, it looks good as it is. Very cool way to create kind of abstract shapes, and you can do this with many like simple shapes and get cool outcomes like this. Now for the next part, this is something we've been doing a lot here on the channel lately, is playing around with cloth. I just really love playing with cloth. What we're gonna do is spawn in that rounded cube, which you just saw me do. If you don't know how to do that, come up here to edit and then preferences. And then under add-ons, you're just gonna type in extra, and you're gonna enable extra objects on both of these, and that'll give you the option to turn on the rounded cube. From there, you set your radius to 1 and your arc to 10. From there, we are just going to scale our rounded sphere or rounded cube up just a little bit there so that it's a little bit closer to our sides here. After we have scaled our sphere up and got it to a positioning that we like, make sure it's not touching anywhere, you know, we're gonna come over and we're gonna put a cloth on it. And like I said, we've been playing with cloth a lot, but we're gonna keep with some basic settings that we've had going. We're gonna set our quality steps to 10. We're gonna set our vertex mass to 1. We're gonna set our shear to 0.1 under stiffness and our bending to 0.2. And then under dampening, we're gonna do the same. We're gonna scroll down and we're gonna turn on our pressure, and we are gonna set this to something between 5 and 10. Let's start with 5 and see how our interaction is. You're also gonna wanna remember that on our outside like abstract shape, we wanna make sure there's a collision on there so our cloth interacts properly. With our cloth object selected again, we're gonna scroll down to collisions, and we are gonna turn this up to 10 and set our distance to 0. Now you're gonna find that this simulation is quite slow, but I can see right off the bat, even with as slow as this is, 5 is not gonna be enough. We're gonna wanna set that to something more like 10. So again, we're gonna come back over to our pressure, turn this up to 10, run it again, see how we do. And 10 looks about where we wanna be, where there's some kind of overlap where it's poking through these openings here, but it isn't like an egregious amount. But with that set up, I'm gonna set this to bake out for maybe like 50 frames. We really don't need that many. I just wanna have an option to choose between some frames that I like, since we're just going for a still here. Now that we've done our bake, we're gonna scroll through and find a frame that we like where there isn't much jittering going on. You can see that like this is starting to eat itself the further we go in, and that's fine for what we're doing now. Obviously, if you wanna animate this, you're gonna have to play with your settings more with your collision, and you know, maybe remeshing this object would be a good idea because it's got terrible topology. But for what we're doing right now, this is totally fine. We're just gonna find a frame that we like, and I think I'm gonna go with one of these. Like 4 or 5 is probably the frame that I will choose to go with. Like we're gonna stick with 5 for the moment. We are going to apply our cloth sim, and we can go ahead and get rid of our collision. And we are gonna select our inner cloth object, and we are gonna put a subdivision surface on it, crank it up to 2 or 3, however high you really wanna go for however much detail you want. I think 3 is good for what we need here. And now you can see that there are some gaps going on where some of these little bubbles did not quite come up as far as the other ones. And I'm actually going to show you what I did for this. And again, there may be like better ways to deal with this, but this is how I did it. First thing first, I'm actually going to apply this subdivision surface so that there's a little bit more mesh to work with here. We're going to select something in the center area here. If you press C and pull up the circle tool, you can select like this, and then you can press O to turn on proportional editing up here. And this will allow you to kind of drag as a group, and it will sort of like, with a radius fall off, it will select the areas around it and allow you to move it around like that. So we're gonna do that for all of the sides that are gonna be facing our camera, since that's all we really need to do that for. Just go through and make like a center selection in each of these, or at least in each of them that you want to adjust. So now with all of these selected, I actually went through and grabbed every side just because I don't know what side I'm gonna be rendering on yet. And I'm going to just scale up until we see that there's just a little bit of overlap. And you'll find that with things are inflating, there will be a little bit of overlap in real life, so don't worry about that. It's going to look very natural and very fine. but you can see that we've got a lot more control over how much this is popping, and it still looks very smooth and clean. So now we are going to set up just a very basic lighting setup, and for these I tend to go with the standard kind of modern product design look where we have a side light and then a not so strong overhead light. It creates good shadows, and if you play with your light values, you're not going to blow anything out. And I just think that it's a super good place to start for most setups. I think that it just generally looks good out of the box, and you don't have to put a ton of effort into it to get a good look. And you can see here our values are looking good. I really like how this lighting turned out. Again, very simple, very basic. If you want to know the exact values of everything in the lighting setup, you can download the project file for free in my description. Also, the project files for everything that was on Twitter will be available on my Patreon if you are interested in those. So now what we're going to do is we're going to select our cloth object. We're going to press A to select everything. We're going to press U to unwrap, and we are going to do Smart UV Project. We can leave all these settings default, and that's just going to give us a rough UV for this. We are going to do the same for this. Except for this one, we are going to do sphere projection. I found that this worked a little bit better with this weird star shape in the center. Without actually going through and UVing it all myself, I found that this worked pretty well. So let's go ahead and start on our cloth material. And for that, first things first, that we are going to need is a color ramp. We're going to plug this into our base color. We're going to drop in a noise texture. Then we're going to connect this to our texture coordinate and mapping node. And now what we're going to do is we are going to drop in another option here on our color ramp, just like a third color. And we're going to start picking out colors that we like. And we're going to have our colors set up something like this, where we're going from our lightest shade, which is going to be also kind of altering the color, like one like step over on our color wheel. So if you're going with a blue, go to green. If you're going green, go to yellow, and then make sure that it's the lightest color available. From there, our center color is going to be our darkest color, which will be in the same color spectrum as the color on the right. So these two will be in the same, so green, green, blue. You know what I'm saying? And this one is also going to be our darkest value. And then this here is actually going to be the color of the object. So in the noise texture, we're going to set this top scale value to something like 16. And when we switch over into rendered view, you can see that it's adding this kind of like dirty value to everything. It's maybe a little bit too much at the moment, but we'll play with that a little bit more in a second. Something we're going to do right now is we're going to turn our subsurf up to something like 1.5. And we are going to play with our subsurface radius values. Again, these are your RGB values. I've talked about this in a couple of videos, but adjusting these will adjust what light gets reflected back. So if we change this top value, for instance, you can see we're making everything much more red. However, we're making a green object. We don't really want much red in there. This middle object is going to be our green. Our bottom is our blue. So if we're going to turn our blue up maybe to something like 0.4, 0.5, and then crank our green up a little bit more, not quite that heavy. We're looking a little like a little slimy almost, and I don't want that. Something we can do to kind of help avoid that is by turning our roughness up. And now that we've got those values in, let's go back and play with our noise a little bit more till we find something that's maybe not quite as harsh as that. We might even go as low as like half of what we were at. Something like this, I think looks pretty nice. Went through and adjusted my colors just a little bit, made this N value a little bit lighter and this one a little bit darker. And I think that that's also kind of helping with the harshness of the grunge. Now, one last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in this material here that I got from Bridge for free, by the way. You should definitely be taking advantage of Bridge if you are not. And this is going to be our normal map that we're going to plug into a bump, and then we're going to plug into our normal here. We can also plug this into our mapping node, or maybe we can just duplicate them, make an entirely new one, and we can adjust our scale value to something that we like. I want to make sure that this texture coordinate is set to UV, and it's a little bit big, so maybe we set it to like 1.5 and 1.5. Now I am recording this at a later time. I forgot to put this in the tutorial, so for the rest of the video, you won't see the bump on this, but I did do this for the thumbnail. So let's get started on this outer layer, and this outer layer is a little bit more complicated. We're actually going to be using two materials here, and what we're going to do right off the bat is you see these inner lips here. In my render, I selected all of these vertices and made them black. So what we're gonna do is switch over into face select mode. And if we just alt select all of these, you can see that we could select rings all the way around. And we're just gonna go through in each one of those rings that's available to the camera or like viewable by the camera, and we'll select them. And then we'll, with this material selected, we'll hit select and assign. So there we are. I've selected all of our faces here, and this took maybe about 3 minutes. And once we have them all selected, we're gonna make sure we have our second material here selected. We can even rename this to black rings. And with that selected, we're gonna hit select and assign. And now if we switch over into material view, we can change our base color here, and we can see that we've got those black rings going on. And the material for those is actually super simple. We are going to select our subsurf and set it to 0.009. And we are going to turn down our roughness just a little bit so that it's got kind of a rubbery feel to it. Now let's move on to the main material of our abstract outer sphere here. I'm going to drag in a surface imperfection texture. This is from a pack that I bought about a year ago. However, you can find them for free all over the internet. What you're looking for is something like this, just black and white value that is smudges, scratches, something like this. Pretty much anything will work. So what we're going to do is we are going to drop in another color ramp, same as last time. We're going to plug our texture into that. And again, we're going to drop in our texture coordinate and our mapping node there. And we're going to plug this color ramp directly into our base color. You can see as soon as we plug in the color ramp, our texture shows up here and it looks pretty good. There's a little bit of stretching going on, but how we're going to be using it, that won't really matter so much. However, if you are frustrated with the stretching, you can play with your scaling values down here, and sometimes you can get that stretching to appear more minimal. But for the time being, we do not want our surface to be black. We want it to be lighter. So we're going to come to our black value and we are going to change this to like an off-white, almost like a yellowish, just slightly in the yellow and just slightly not white. And then for our end handle here, we're going to set this to kind of a brown color just so that we can further sell this idea of like grunge and scruffy, you know, maybe it's been outside, been rolled around a little bit. We're going to take our brown handle and we're going to slide this up just a little bit. And you can see that we're starting to get the kind of like dirty effect fading in down there. All right, so these are the settings that I have for my mapping texture. I've got it somewhere that I like the look of, where it's just got some little scuffs and scrapes in it. I think that looks pretty nice. All right, so those are our basic materials for this object, but something that I think completely sells this is the particle systems on our cloth. You can see it in this image really well that we've got these little fuzzy hairs all over it. And I think that this really sells that this object is like real and that has had some like distress going on to it. And again, these are super easy to do. We're going to make two particle systems. We're going to set them both to hair, and we are going to set our base number here to something like 500 and our length segments to something really small. But you might be noticing that you've got some hair sticking through the plastic here. So we're going to do something really quick to fix that. We're going to go into edit mode on our cloth object, and with our circle tool, we are going to select all of this stuff that's peeking through here. We're just going to make like a real rough vertex map of everything. Now with these selected like this, we can come down here to our vertex group tab. We can select new, select, assign. We've got our new group. We can rename this something like hair. We're going to spell it wrong and we're going to leave it because we're cool. And then we're going to come down here to vertex groups under our particle system settings. Under density, we'll select hair. Now that we've got that out of the way, we're going to come down to children and we're going to select interpolated. And with that checked, we're going to go into rendered mode and take a quick look. We can see that we've got something going on with our texture here. Also, our hair shape is awful, but let's deal with one thing at a time. We're going to create a new material up here and we're going to call this one hair. And I think this one will spell correctly. So we're going to come back over to our particle system settings. We're going to drop down rendered view and we're going to select hair. We just want this material to be white. It's going to sell the fuzziness of this object a lot easier with having less hair. Now back into our particle system settings, we're going to go over to hair shape and we are going to select the diameter root and change it to 0.1. And you can see that that makes our hairs look a lot more like hair. However, they're standing straight up. So we're going to drop down our roughness tab and we're going to increase our random value. Not a ton, just a little bit. Now we can change our display amount to something like 100 if we want to. Let's see, if we're scrolled back like this, yeah, no, I think that looks totally fine. Again, we're already getting much more of the fuzziness look to it. And it's kind of cheaty because it looks like there's a lot going on there and there really isn't. It's a very cool effect that's super easy to get. But now that we've done that, we're going to basically do the same thing again with our hair system, except this one, we're going to leave a little bit longer and we are going to do significantly less hairs. So again, make sure you come down to your vertex group, you select hair, that way they're all in the right place. And we're going to set this to maybe something like 500 again, interpolated, but we're going to set this to 1, I think. So with those selected, again, we are going to change our diameter root to something maybe like 0.2 this time, maybe a little bit thicker. We're going to be creating our little like fuzzy curly hairs. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase our random quite a bit more this time, maybe turn our size down a little bit. And we're going to drop down our kink tab and select curl. And we are going to lower our amplitude until we're at something like maybe, I don't know, 0.02 is probably good. Now these are a little bit long for what I want to be doing here. So we're gonna kind of dial that in a little bit, and we might increase the amplitude on our kink value just a little bit more, something like this maybe, and maybe even lowering the amount of hairs to something like 300 could be good. Then under both render and viewport, we are going to crank up our steps to 5. This will make it so that our hairs are a little bit more smooth and less jagged. They kind of have a faux geometry to them. And yeah, now we've got this kind of like curly, fuzzy hair going on our object. So now we're gonna work on the outer shell of our little cube here. And how we're gonna do that is by dropping in another rounded cube, and we're gonna scale it up till it is covering this. This is also how I made the little spheres that float around in the render that is the thumbnail. What you're gonna do is you're gonna select this like rounded square within the rounded cube, and we're going to delete those faces. Once you have those faces deleted, you can exit edit mode, click shade smooth, and then come over to our modifiers, and we are gonna put a solidify modifier on here, and we are gonna set this to have an inward thickness, probably something around 0.04 will work, and then we are gonna put a subdiv on it and crank this up to maybe 2 or 3. And this is the basic idea of how we got the outer shell. I played around with shapes. I know this isn't exactly what's in the thumbnail, but it is like very similar. You just go through and delete faces until you find a shape that you like for the outside. And for the little spheres, I would duplicate them, scale them up, and kind of like rotate them and offset them so you get like a weird like parallaxy kind of effect going on. Yeah, just something like this. So yeah, that is the basic effect and what we did here. You can play with your values, maybe increase the amount of hairs on, this is the thumbnail render that I did, and I think the hair value is a little bit higher here. It's actually quite a bit higher. I left our second hair system here to 1000 and then cranked the display amount up to 500. And then for our curlier hairs on this one, I set it to 1000 instead of like 300 on the last one. I really wanted to go for something very like fuzzy and hairy. This one is a lot more distressed than the ones that were on Twitter. And the more I played with it, the more distressed I made it. And I started straying further and further from the original project, but I like this one a lot. This is something that I'm super proud of. And even though it's very, very simple and definitely anybody can do this, this is one of the things that I love to create in Blender, just stuff where I sit down, I let my mind wander. None of this is technically correct. The topology is horrible. The modeling is wrong. You know, none of it's technically right, but it looks good and I had fun making it. And as long as I'm not forming a bad habit doing it, it's totally fine. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Do remember that the thumbnail project file will be available in my Discord. The Twitter project files will be available on my Patreon if you want to take a look at those. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you again real soon.